There comes a moment when you finally admit something you didn't want to face. Talking didn't save you. Explaining didn't protect you. Proving yourself didn't bring peace. You spoke with honesty, and it was misunderstood. You opened your chest, and it was used against you. You tried to be seen, and somehow the noise swallowed you whole. Every time you spoke, it felt like you were handing people another weapon. And slowly, painfully, you learned a truth no one warns you about: the world doesn't reward the loudest heart. It tests it. You remember how hard you tried. How much you gave. How carefully you chose your words, hoping this time they'd understand. But they only heard what fit their version of you. Your truth had to fight for air in rooms that were already decided against you. And that fight didn't break you all at once. It drained you quietly. Sentence by sentence. Explanation by explanation. Until even defending yourself felt heavy. Until your own voice started to feel like a burden you carried. That's when something inside you changed. You didn't pull back because you were scared. You pulled back because you were tired. Tired of reopening the same wound just to prove you were hurt. Tired of surviving conversations instead of living your life. You stopped reacting. You stopped justifying. You stopped begging to be understood by people who were committed to misunderstanding you. And for the first time, you chose silence, not as weakness, but as rest. At first, that silence felt uncomfortable. Almost humiliating. When you didn't respond, it looked like you lost. People assumed you had no answer, no strength, no backbone. And for a moment, even you wondered if staying quiet meant you gave something up. You felt the words building in your chest, the urge to explain, to correct, to defend yourself one last time. Your body was ready for battle. Your mind was trained for reaction. But you didn't speak. And that pause, that single, deliberate pause, changed something. You realized the silence wasn't empty. It was controlled. You were holding back words that could burn the room. You were resisting the instinct to react just to feel seen. That restraint wasn't fear. It was awareness. For the first time, you weren't handing your power to every trigger thrown your way. You were keeping it. You started to notice how exhausting it had been to always be available. Always reachable. Always explaining yourself like your existence needed permission. How your presence became expected, your effort invisible, your words reduced to background noise. You gave and gave, hoping respect would follow. But it didn't. It leaked away slowly, unnoticed, until you barely recognized yourself. So you stepped back. Not in anger. Not in bitterness. But with clarity. You chose silence the way someone chooses rest after being pushed too far. And in that silence, something unfamiliar began to grow. Not coldness. Not distance. But strength. Control. Clarity. You weren't disappearing. You were conserving yourself. And without realizing it yet, you had just taken the first step toward a kind of confidence no one could take from you. Once you step into that silence, you start noticing things you were too distracted to see before. The world doesn't slow down for you. People keep talking. Accusing. Assuming. Waiting for a reaction. And that's when the real test begins. Your chest tightens. Your mind races. The old reflex kicks in: explain yourself, defend your name, correct the story before it spreads. You feel that familiar heat rising, the urge to jump back into the noise just to prove you still exist. But this time, you don't. You sit with the discomfort. You let the tension pass through you instead of exploding out of you. And it's harder than speaking ever was. Silence demands discipline. It forces you to face your own impulses. To watch them rise, and fall. You realize how often you used words as armor. How talking became a way to soothe your fear of being misunderstood. How reacting gave you the illusion of control, even when it was costing you peace. Something sharpens inside you during this phase. Your awareness deepens. You start to see patterns clearly: who listens only when it benefits them, who thrives on your reactions, who loses interest when you stop feeding the chaos. And that clarity stings. Because you see how much energy you poured into people who never planned to hold you with care. Silence strips everything down to truth. You begin hearing yourself again. Not the version shaped by expectations or pressure, but the quieter voice underneath: your instincts, your limits, your boundaries. You notice how often you crossed your own lines just to keep the peace. How often you shrank your feelings to make others comfortable. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. The need to respond starts loosening its grip. Not every misunderstanding feels personal anymore. Not every comment deserves your breath. You realize that reacting was never strength, it was habit. And habits can be broken. Slowly, intentionally, painfully at first. People may think you've changed. That you've become distant. That you've lost your fire. But what they don't see is that the fire didn't go out. It went inward. It became focused. Contained. Dangerous in a different way. You're no longer loud because you no longer need to convince anyone of who you are. And in this quiet phase, without applause or validation, you start building something real, a sense of self that doesn't shake every time the room disagrees with you. At some point, the silence stops feeling like resistance and starts feeling like ground beneath your feet. You're no longer holding back words out of effort. You're choosing restraint because it finally makes sense. The chaos around you hasn't disappeared, but it no longer lives inside your chest. You can feel it now, the difference between being calm and being numb. This isn't withdrawal. This is stability. You notice how your presence changes when you stop explaining yourself. You walk into rooms without rehearsing who you need to be. You listen more than you speak. You act without announcing. And strangely, people begin to respond differently. Not louder. Not aggressively. More carefully. Because there's something unsettling about someone who doesn't rush to defend themselves. Someone who doesn't chase approval. Someone who stands still. You realize respect never came from availability. It came from boundaries. The people who were only comfortable when you were overgiving start to drift. The ones who needed your constant reassurance lose interest. And yes, that part hurts. It feels like loss at first. Like you're being misunderstood all over again. But this time, you don't chase the explanation. You let the distance speak. Because distance reveals what words never could: who values you when you're no longer bending. Your confidence begins to take a different shape. It's not loud. It's not performative. It doesn't spike with praise or collapse with criticism. It settles. It stays. You trust yourself now in a way you didn't before. You trust your timing. Your instincts. Your restraint. You don't need to be right in every moment, because you're no longer at war with yourself. And that changes everything. You start choosing your battles with care. Some things still deserve your voice. Some lines still need to be drawn. But now, when you speak, it lands. Because it's rare. Because it's intentional. Because it comes from a place that isn't desperate to be understood. Silence didn't erase your power. It refined it. You see it clearly now: all those years of over-explaining weren't about clarity. They were about fear. Fear of being misjudged. Fear of being dismissed. Fear of not matching. And once that fear loosens its grip, you don't need to fill the air anymore. You exist without permission. You move without justification. This is the quiet confidence no one can take from you. It doesn't depend on who stays or who leaves. It doesn't panic when the room disagrees. It doesn't rise or fall with attention. It's built from self-respect, from knowing when to speak and when to let silence do the work. From understanding that your worth was never up for debate, only your willingness to protect it. And in this place, finally, you feel steady. Not because life got easier, but because you stopped leaking yourself into every moment that demanded proof. You stopped bleeding just to be believed. You stopped fighting to be seen. You didn't disappear. You arrived.